I want to bring in Congressman Jim Himes now, Democrat from Connecticut. Representative, and we've spoken in the past about the juxtaposition between what we're doing here in terms of cutting growth or austerity and what they're doing across the pond. Do you believe that some of the cuts that Representative Schweikert was talking about could put us in a similar situation as the UK is in, and do you think that that's the right way to go?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I guess I would sort of comment on his rather partisan presentation by saying precisely that. And by the way, don't listen to Congressman Himes of Connecticut. Listen to Mark Zandi and Moody's Analytics, who said that if we went with the $61 billion in cuts that the Republicans have proposed in the continuing resolution, you could see as much as 2% of GDP growth shaved off. Goldman Sachs, just to quote another, is saying that there's a significant economic negative consequence of cuts of that magnitude. Zandi said, you know, potentially as many as 700,000 jobs. The Federal Reserve saying that cuts of those magnitude would be devastating for the economy. Nobody is disputing that we have to make some cuts, but the fact is that cuts in this tiny little slice of the budget are a tiny part of what we need to do. And so this argument about whether it should be $60 billion or $30 billion is both a profoundly dishonest argument, because it's such a tiny slice of the budget, but it's also, if we go too big and too fast, we'll see exactly what we're seeing in the UK right now, which is an austerity budget that would reduce job growth. And that's not something that anybody in this country wants.
Good morning, Congressman. To both of you, I'm obviously interested in job growth because we see it as very important in a business like ours with two franchise businesses. What kind of proposals do you have to stimulate the growth? I recognize the point you're making about the deficit. And a second question will be, the President set up the Deficit Commission. That recommended an overall cuts of about $3.9 trillion. What's your view about using that as the basis for the upcoming budget once the current budget is resolved?
Representative Himes, why don't you take that from the CEO of Duncan, if you don't mind, first?
Sure. No, look, I think that's a terrific question. The President's Debt Reduction Commission you referred to, the Simpson-Bowles Commission, made a painful and in some instances, not terribly attractive proposal, but in its aggregate, it is actually honest, in contrast to the dishonest debate that I characterized earlier. It deals with taxes, it deals with entitlements, and it deals with spending, defense and non-defense. And as you point out, it would save almost $1 billion over 10 years. I'm on record, and I'd be curious to know whether my Republican colleague would go on record as saying, I would vote for that proposal if it came before the House. There's a lot of stuff in there I don't like, but the situation is urgent, and that proposal, rather than in contrast to the dishonest debate over, how much we're going to cut in this tiny little slice of the budget, is comprehensive and is the kind of plan that we need to convince investors around the world and others that we can put ourselves on a fiscally sustainable path.
Representative Schweikert, would you go on the record with that?
Yeah, actually, it's a great question. There's a number of things in the President's Deficit Commission, particularly also on some of the tax policy that would help us stimulate growth, a wider, broader, fairer tax system. But actually, if you even hear just the debate between my friend from Connecticut, you get a sort of a sense of, well, if it's actual cutting and spending that's on the table right now, demagogue it, but if it's something off in the future, then we can embrace it. And you end up with some really unusual scoring, because I actually sit on financial services, so we had Bernanke in front of us a couple weeks ago. And he did say, yes, the $61 billion in their modeling would reduce some jobs, but the flip side, the dynamic scoring of keeping $61 billion in the economy and the velocity and multiplying effect that has would be much healthier in the private markets. So this is the give and take that's going to go back and forth. But think about it. We're going to run $1.5 trillion in debt this year. And then we argue over $61 billion. It's almost absurd.
Well, it is absolutely a give and take. Unfortunately, I have to cut the conversation off here. I hope we can continue it all at another point. Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut, Congressman David Schweikert, Republican from Arizona. Gentlemen, we appreciate your time this morning.